Are Rick Pitino and the Johnnies about to dethrone the back-to-back national champions?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Happy Wednesday lunchtime to you. It's the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade. You're joining me at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your listen around the lunchtime hour today. And we want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. I say lunch hour, of course, on the Pacific Coast. If you're out there, it's like breakfast at Wimbledon for you. And so thanks for joining us with your toast and coffee. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. It's Wednesday, and that means I am joined today by our good buddy Leaf Tulane, who joins us every week on the show. Always lots of fun to be together. By the way, if you've not checked out our brand new Locked On College Basketball Game Night, that is a show that Leaf is hosting as part of the Locked On College Basketball every Saturday night to wrap up all of the great action. This weekend, it's going to include a big-time Friday night Big East game, so lots of great stuff. But today, man, we had a crazy wild Tuesday night of hoops. We've just been having good Tuesday after good Tuesday. It's awesome. Sparty goes 0 in LA. Kentucky can't defend. The top of the Big 12 is separating themselves. Georgia Tech and Clemson played 15 extra minutes in Little John. Some tough injury news for West Virginia and so much more. I mean, it's so loaded. But Leaf, we got to start in the Big Apple, where last night, St. John's, number 12 in the nation, hosted number 11 Marquette. The Johnnies win this thing 70-64, a near triple-double for Kadari Richmond. It's crazy. 18 points, 11 boards, 8 assists. And by virtue of that, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but St. John's now leads the Big East at 11-1. Creighton, who plays tonight, is 9-2. And then Marquette and UConn are both sitting with 3 losses, 2 games back in the loss column of the Johnnies. Leaf, how big and important a win was this for St. John's over Marquette?
It was huge because I think St. John's needed the belief that they could win against a UConn or a Marquette to solidify, hey, we are the team to beat right now, because they've been beating teams that are frankly inferior to them, and they've done so handily in most of the cases. And their 3 losses are by a combined 5 points, I want to say.
That's exactly right.
So
and in double overtime, one of them, by the way.
And they should have won the one that went to double overtime
right.
like 7 times over. So I think they needed a program win. And even though you have about 20 wins and you've been unthwarted for quite a while, I think that this was a bigger game for St. John's than it was for Marquette. And they deserved this game. They probably should have won by 15. Like, they got through absolute ineptitude shooting the ball, not just struggles. Like, they could not make a free throw to save their life. If they could make a free throw, this game's not even particularly close.
Yeah, the numbers, folks, really quick. 17
yeah.
of 31 from the stripe. Keep going, Leaf.
And it improved. Like, that got better.
That's right.
It was at 1 point 6 of 17, I believe. Or maybe even 6 of 19. But my point being is they can't shoot free throws, so they don't shoot threes. And that's fine, because Michigan State and Izzo, as well as Pitino, they know, hey, like, we don't need to rely on threes. St. John's, they kept saying this stat on the broadcast, they score 60% of their points from 2. That's great. They know their strong suits. They know what they do. They set up the paint for Kadari Richmond, Davon Smith drives, Lewis as well. So that's okay, but it comes with a price. You have to be able to punish teams on the glass. They do so. But you have to make some free throws. And it kept Marquette in the game. And for a second, you thought they might give it away. But they're relentless on defense. Absolutely sensational defensively. They can force a turnover at a blink of an eye. They rebound the ball. They give themselves chances. And I said on game night, for those of you who listen every day, thank you. I said on game night that I think Marquette losing to UConn was a matter of time, even though it was at Marquette, because they just haven't been winning convincingly against the inferior teams in the way that St. John's had. So I think this sets St. John's up to win the Big East, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I felt like watching it kind of proved what I believed could be true. And I watched that game, and I don't think you can shoot 50% all the time. Like, it has to go up from the free throw line. So I'm starting to believe the Johnnies might be for real. And what if Pitino makes a Final Four with a 4th team? Is he the greatest ever? I'm starting to hope. I want to see that train happen.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's so great for all the people who are like, why would you hire Rick Pitino? Well, look, I mean, whatever, fine. But he is undeniably one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. And it was only a matter of time before he had St. John's rolling like this, just like he did Iona. Leaf, you make multiple good points there. Let me follow up on a couple of them. There was a defensive possession that St. John's had when it was still a little bit in the balance. There's like a minute and a half to go, where their rotations and the way they were switching and communicating. I mean, it was a thing of poetic beauty, folks. If you did not see this possession, you need to go back and watch it. I literally, my mouth was like, oh, that's incredible. It was so fun to watch. You make the point about their rebounding. How about this? We talked about Kaderi Richmond having that near triple-double, including 11 rebounds. 3 different Red Storm players had a double-double. Zubi Ejiofor, 13 points, 13 boards. RJ Luis, 17 points, 11 boards. So given all that, as you would imagine, they obliterated Marquette on the boards 50-28. That means they were plus 22. I always love numbers like this, Leaf. The Johnnies had more defensive rebounds, 29, than Marquette had total rebounds, 28. That's so crazy. And yeah, to your point, they are number 3 in the nation in terms of getting their most points from 2. There are only 2 teams that get a bigger percentage of their points from inside the arc or not at the free throw line. And so, Leaf, let's move then into what does this mean for both of these teams? Let's go with Marquette first, because then I think we'll talk St. John's and what it means big picture for the Big East. For Marquette, as you said, they lose that home game to UConn on Saturday and then drop this one on the road at MSG. That is 2 losses, but as you said, the way things often go, the teams that are at the top of a conference or the top of a league is because they handle their business against the teams they're supposed to beat and handle it like definitively. Marquette has not been doing that. They lost at home to X. That's their other Big East loss. And that's the thing that comes back to bite you when you're battling with Creighton and St. John's and UConn for the top of the conference. So that's where maybe Marquette is at right now. And look, their next game, they have to go to Creighton on Saturday. So they're right in the midst, just like UConn is, of a crazy 3-game stretch. Where are you at with Marquette right now, Leaf?
I feel like I've been out on Marquette for a little while, even when they were in the top 10 definitively and had no losses to speak of in Big East play. But the reason is Cam Jones just has to do so much.
He does.
It reminds me a little bit of when Cassius Winston was at Michigan State his senior year, and that team didn't get to go to the tournament, so you can't say, oh, like, yeah, they lost early. But it felt like a team that was boom or bust. Like when they played great with he and Xavier Tillman, they had a really good chance to win a game, but they needed absolute excellence every game. So Cam Jones struggles at all, relating it back to Marquette. I think that the Robins, which are Stevie Mitchell and Chase Ross, those guys aren't natural scorers. They're more defensive plug-and-play players, and it makes for guys like Parham and Owens and Lowry, who's all stepped up at various times yesterday against an excellent St. John's defense. They need to be consistently very good, and I don't think they have that. So I think it's fighting an uphill battle for Marquette. So I've consistently been lower on them because of just the absolute haul that Cam Jones has to do every single game to make them competitive. And I just don't think it's a recipe for success in terms of a tournament. So we did contenders and pretenders when Marquette had 1 loss, I believe. And we were both out on them. And maybe that's rough because there's only so many contenders. But That's a team that was ranked within the top 10. So it was within the realm of possibility. And within the Big East, I think they're the team with the 3rd highest ceiling still. But it does feel like they're starting to be figured out a little bit how to take away Cam Jones's offense and make everyone else beat them.
Yeah, and this is a tournament team. Let's make no mistakes. We're just talking about as comparatively to the very tip top of the Big East, which now leads me then back, Leaf, to St. John's, who sits atop the Big East right now. Their lone loss was at Creighton by a point. And then, as you know, the 2 non-con losses, Georgia on a neutral by 3, Baylor on a neutral by 1 in double OT. But Leaf, my question then for us is, will St. John's ultimately dethrone UConn as the Big East champs? As we sit here right now on Wednesday, February 5th, at FanDuel, St. John's is the betting favorite, minus 190 followed by Creighton at plus 350, Marquette at plus 600, and then UConn at plus 1,000. But here's the thing for me, Leaf. Here's why I wonder what's going to happen. St. John's has 8 games left in the Big East, and it is a doozy because it includes home and home with UConn. They still got to play the Huskies twice. They've got to host Creighton, who they lost to at Creighton. They end the regular season at Marquette, so a redo of last night, and they still got to go to Villanova. So that's 5 of their 8 games that make this a very tough closing slate. How do you think St. John's will navigate that?
I think St. John's deserves to be the favorite because they have 11 conference wins as opposed to the following being 9. So they're they have a game in hand, which I think in these type of things matters. I don't think Marquette can make it up because Marquette also has to go to Connecticut. And I believe they have to go to Creighton as well. So I understand that's the same as St. John's, but they're ahead. Now you look at Creighton. Creighton's the team that's sneaky in this because they were struggling early in the year, but have won in the Big East play.
Yeah.
And so you look at what they have, their schedule, I think, is more conducive to success, but I don't think they're as good of a team. But they finish, if you look at this, against DePaul, Xavier, Seton Hall, and Butler.
Yeah. And a home game against Georgetown right before all that.
And so then they do have a gauntlet of going to Providence, which I know Providence isn't great, but that's a very difficult place to play.
Tonight. That's Marquette, tonight.
And that is tonight. Against Marquette, against UConn, at St. John's. So my guess is St. John's is able to do so because all the top teams have to play one another, and having that game in hand, being 2 games in the win column ahead, means the most to me. But I would say Creighton would be the team that if someone else wins it other than St. John's, I think it would be Creighton over UConn because UConn still doesn't have their full team. And a couple of those games are on neutral sites, essentially, at the Garden against St. John's, which works against St. John's too, but it's not at Gamble Pavilion, to my knowledge.
Right. And so, Leaf, to your point there, I think when we go to bed on Sunday, February 16th, after Creighton and St. John's have played, we're going to know almost exactly what kind of position Creighton's going to be in, despite the fact they have 5 games left. That's a very, as you said, manageable slate after that point. So how Creighton does in their next 4 games, to me, is going to determine where they sit when we get to Big East tournament time. All right, let's move to the Big Ten, where Sparty could not handle the LA swing of games, and consequently, the Big Ten is now up for grabs. And also, Kentucky, my goodness, they have hit a little bit of a wall, with apologies to John and not Calipari, but John Wall, and it's all because they don't know how to stop people from scoring right now. We're going to have that conversation and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about our good friends at Game Time. Are you looking for tickets to your next big event? Well, whether it's a concert, comedy show, sporting event, whatever, finding the right ticket at the right price has never been easier because of Game Time Picks. It doesn't have to be a headache anymore. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you, curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks, man, and it has been such a help. Maybe you're looking tickets for Sunday's big game, right? Let me encourage you, keep waiting. Why? Because Game Time, I was looking at some charts on Game Time, and it shows like the best times to buy, and it's like day of or 3 days out is when it tanks the biggest in terms of price. So maybe wait till Sunday. Maybe think about tomorrow. That would be a good day to grab tickets as well. Best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they're going to refund you not just 100%, but 110% of the difference. That's big time. So if you're ready to make your next event even better, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Leaf, Michigan State went out to South California, SoCal, as the locals call it. I don't know. Do they call it that for real, or is that just a movie thing? I don't know.
Occasionally, I spend more time in NorCal, and I've heard it. So
is it NoCal or NorCal? I've always wondered that too.
I think it's NorCal.
Oh man, I got to get up on my Cali game here. Anyway, Michigan State heads out west. They lost to USC a couple days ago, and then last night, Tuesday night, they lose at UCLA 63-61. So Leaf, After an undefeated run through the first 9 games of Big Ten play, Michigan State now has dropped, and consequently, they are tied in the loss column, at least, with Purdue and Michigan atop the Big Ten standings. I want to get to that in a minute to talk about the shape and state of the Big Ten. But what's up with Michigan State? Is this just a look, it's hard to go out west and win these games, or is there something going on with Sparty right now?
Well, I think the reason for consecutive losses against teams that I wouldn't say are great is probably it's difficult to travel. But I also think it was time for the Spartans to have lost a game.
That's right.
And they kudos to them. They took care of business 9 games in a row against what I would consider soft scheduling. And that really helps their resume because you win 9 straight games and now you're 9-2 as opposed to being, 7-2 heading into those. And you look like a far different resume, both within conference and in terms of the national perspective. But Michigan State wasn't blowing teams out. They were just winning steadily. They won their home games and they beat inferior teams on the road. And now you go out west, and I think you had a chance to win either of these games, but the lack of shooting really showed itself to the point where Eric Musselman quite literally had a center stay in the paint doing jumping jacks because there's no threat of a big scoring on Michigan State in terms of a pop or a short roll. It's only right at the basket. So I think they were overachieving so much so that Michigan State was exposed by teams packing it in and playing very dense defense. So they have to knock down shots, and they didn't knock down enough shots. I think they'll be all right. They go back to East Lansing and take care of business a couple games. But I don't think, and I never thought that they were the best team in the Big Ten in terms of their actual ceiling. They were just the most consistent at that point. And their consistency level was, if you're like a believer in percentiles, to me, their consistency was like 75th, 80th percentile. And, that's great. That's going to win you a lot of games. But when a team plays their best and Michigan State plays their best, like Illinois and Purdue to me had higher ceilings all along, even when those teams were 2 or 3 games behind the Spartans.
And there is something to be said for that consistency, right? Like a lot of times regular season champs are not the teams that have the highest ceiling. It's the teams that do what they're supposed to do night in and night out. So there's certainly something to be said for that and is a hallmark of Tom Izzo teams. As for this game specifically, it's tied at 61 with under 30 seconds left. UCLA gets a layup from Eric Daly with 7 seconds to go up 63-61. And then Jaden Akins misses a 3 at the buzzer, and Michigan State comes home with the loss. Pretty cool. Both Kareem and Magic were in the house supporting their alma maters out there in LA at a place, by the way, where, in a part of the country where they won together as Lakers. So that was really cool, I thought, to see. Leaf, let's keep going because we got so much more to do. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, IU lost at Wisconsin. Good win for the Badgers. Indiana now down to 5-7 in Big Ten play. And we hear Mike Woodson using the same kind of words about his team that Mick Cronin was about UCLA, who, by the way, I forgot to mention, UCLA now, after Mick Cronin made all those comments, Bruins have reeled off 6 in a row. Leaf now up to 17-6, 8-4 in Big Ten play. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Look, Indiana, I just don't know what else we say about them. Things are in a not good shape. But Leaf, I want to move on because we got so much to get to. Let's go to the SEC, where we had another top 25 matchup. Number 14, Kentucky at Ole Miss. The Rebs win this thing 98-84. Still no Lamont Butler for the Wildcats at this game. And Leaf, ultimately for me, a loss at Ole Miss, who's a very good team, is kind of expected, right? Like Ole Miss was favored in this game. The problem was losing to Arkansas at home on Saturday, and that now compounds all this. And consequently, Kentucky has lost 4 of 5 games, and the issue is the defense. In these 4 losses, they've given up 90.8 points a game, and the totals they've given up are 102, 74, 89, and 98. Their defensive efficiency is down to 112 at KenPom. Leaf. What is going on with Mark Pope's club? Say that 5 times fast.
Well, I think it was bound to occur in SEC play that there would be a lull. I do think it's a little more drastic than I anticipated it being, because I think you can find a stretch in any SEC team schedule in which you could point out 3 losses in a row. I don't think that will happen.
Easy, yes.
I don't think that'll happen to Auburn or Alabama. I want to preface that before that people say that. But that's just because they're better basketball teams.
It's crazy, dude. It is crazy how good they're both playing.
So you look at Kentucky and you look at Mississippi State. And the reason I bring up Mississippi State, even though I know they lost to Ole Miss, is they just lost a bunch of games in a row. Ole Miss had just lost a bunch in a row. It's not because they're bad, but they have more warts that can be exposed when a team knows what those are, and they have the weaponry to beat them. And that's what the SEC has. So Kentucky, I say all that to say this. Kentucky, we've known they've been inept defensively. The way they win is they outscore you.
That's right.
They outscore you, and if you can play a game that's catered to Kentucky's pace, in which they score and you score, and they have a few more weapons because you don't know who's at the top of their scouting report, then they'll probably win. However, they've been missing Lamont Butler, who I think is their best player and their most valuable player. So if you're missing that guy, who's also an all defensive conference guy, he won the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year 2 years in a row. So he's got the defensive ability, even on a bad defensive team. Missing a guy who's individually good at defense really matters, not to mention 13 points per game and the point guard. So what I think happens is they don't play as good of defense, and I don't think they create as quick of an action to get into that very flowing, beautiful offense that's orchestrated from the high post. Amari Williams is the trigger man, but they don't have a key component to that. And then they have a limited Andrew Carr. So you have two players that are not quite right, and it allows for teams to take away actions for Kobe Bryant, Jackson Robinson, and force Otego away to be the guy who's really their only breakdown guy. So I think offensively, they haven't been as good as they have been, which has typically been their get out of jail free card. And then defensively, they lost a really good defensive player in Lamont Butler.
Yeah.
And they already were pretty bad. Like I think before he went out, I made sure to check this. They're about 88th in KenPom defensively, and they're already plummeting down that. So I think teams that have the weaponry to beat them and they don't quite have the same artillery offensively has combined at the same time, and they look worse off than they probably are. But I do think it's important to recognize, like, this is a vulnerable team. They've won a lot of close games, but they're not as dominant as some of the teams that were ranked similarly to them.
Yeah, nice night for Matthew Morrell in particular. 24 points. Malik Dia adds 16 for Ole Miss. A really nice win for Chris Beard's team. And Leaf, when you look at the final score of this game, it doesn't look awful. It was a 14-point margin, but don't be confused. Ole Miss led this game by as many as 27. Kentucky literally never led in the game. And excuse me, that's just where things are. The most impressive stat in this game for me, Leaf, was on the Ole Miss side. Just one turnover for the Rebels. UK only had 8 themselves. That's not bad, but Ole Miss led the points off turnovers 9-0. And just even little things like that really, really start to add up. So we'll see what happens moving forward for both these teams. Kentucky on Saturday hosts South Carolina, but then next Tuesday they got to host Tennessee. We'll see what happens with that. They just won, remember, in Knoxville a week or two ago. For Ole Miss, a needed win. They had lost 4 out of 5. And Saturday they're at LSU, and then Wednesday at South Carolina. So a couple winnable games to maybe stock up some wins here for Ole Miss. Elsewhere in the SEC, Leaf, Vandy goes to Florida. A dangerous team. They fall out of the top 25 this week. No Walter Clayton after that injury he suffered Saturday, and the Gators win this thing 86-75. Leaf, they got 51 points in the second half. And then Auburn hosted Oklahoma. They just keep on rolling 98-70. As you said, this Auburn team, man, there's something different. Any quick observations from either of those other SEC games?
I think Auburn, they found a way to win with their defense in a couple games, and that's really unleashed their ability to win with offense. I know they're already one of the most efficient offenses ever, and it's analytically derived, all this. But Janai Broom's back, and they learned that, hey, we can rely on defense to win without Broom. Now we have him, and his ability to facilitate, draw double teams opens up a far better experience for Chad Baker-Mazara, for Tahad Pettiford. And now they know how to win without him. So I think this team is even more well-equipped to make a deep run because they've handled adversity admirably.
Really good stuff for them. And again, good for Florida to be able to win shorthanded against a better than expected Vandy team. Leaf, we got to keep trucking. Texas Tech and Arizona, speaking of keeping doing something, they just keep winning and have now joined Houston as the upper tier of the Big 12. Any hope that Kansas or Iowa State can fight their way back into it? We're going to talk about all that coming up in just a second. Leaf, on Tuesday night, Texas Tech keeps their winning ways going, holding serve at home over a tough Baylor team who was without VJ Edgecombe, I should mention, 73-59. The Bears did get Jeremy Roach back, but no Langston Love. For Texas Tech, they got Kevin Overton back, but man, a nice performance. JT Toppin obviously back after getting ejected, unfortunately, tweaked his left ankle a little bit, came back to play, but we're going to have to keep tabs on that to see. The dude was Chance McMillan in that game. The nightcap after that, Arizona goes on the road to BYU, figured out how to breathe in all that elevation and wins 85-74. These two teams, Leaf, they were not the heralded teams coming in to the preseason. Arizona, I would say, was more heralded than Texas Tech, but both of these teams are really, really doing it right now and starting to separate themselves along with Houston, who Texas Tech just beat. These three teams each have one or just two losses in Big 12 play, one for Houston and Arizona, two for Texas Tech. But then there's a little bit of a separation, and Kansas and Iowa State both have 4 losses. So we've got this upper tier. Leaf, I want to talk about these games, but first I just want to ask the question, is this our top 3? Any hope that Kansas or Iowa State can figure some things out and jump into that upper echelon with them?
I think in terms of the regular season, it becomes too difficult to catch up. So I do think it is probably the top 3, and they're also playing very well, so I don't see them slipping up too easily. And then the other thing worth noting is just the way that the teams are winning has become more decisive. Like Texas Tech had one loss where they lost by 1 to Iowa State, and you were thinking, oh, wow, Iowa State's the best team in this league. They just won at Texas Tech, and it had everything going against them. Well, since then, they've looked a little bit like Marquette to my eyes, where they had lost an offensive key component in Milan Momcilovic. And once he's gone out, they've started to slip down the Ken Palm ranking. So I'll address the bigger picture, but this is really important. They were in the top 6 offensively, and now they're 20th or 19th.
Ooh.
So, and that's been in a 4-game stretch, and it's been noticeable in watching them play. So I do think they're in a lull, and I don't think they catch up by the end of the conference play, but I do think they could be a dangerous team come March when he's back and they figure out how to play without him. As for Arizona, Texas Tech, I thought they were both teams that could make Sweet 16s, and I tweeted all about Texas Tech all offseason long because I loved their roster. They've got the ability, and I think you mentioned something subtly. You said the dude tonight was Chance McMillan. It's because you don't know who it's going to be. They won a game without their best player, their leading rebounder, their leading scorer, because he got ejected for something absolutely bogus, lost their coach, and they rallied together and beat Houston at Houston. Like, it's as hard a task in basketball as you can find, and they did so and had a completely different strategy they employed for that game than they do for almost any game, where they just decided, we're going to ISO and score. Like, they've got dudes. They got Darian Williams. They got Chance McMillan. Hawkins can cross you up and score, nice. And he has a bunch of assist to turnover ratio stats that are you're thinking, wow, like they're really, really good. And then Arizona, they stole one from Iowa State, and they've really perpetuated themselves into the top of the Big 12 because they won that game and they took care of business. Similar to Michigan State, they took care of business early against the inferior teams that they played. And now they've beaten teams like BYU. It's a really tough place to play in Provo, but they're not a very good basketball team. And I would say the same thing about Kansas State that Arizona had beaten, that they beat the teams that they need to beat on the road, and they've taken care of home court, luckily. And now that they've taken care of home court, you really got to figure out how to play this team because they changed their identity too by getting smaller, which I think they were handed a blessing in disguise when Krivas went down because they couldn't continue to play 2 bigs. It was frustrating to watch. And now they've figured out how to use all that talent and athleticism to their benefit.
And the fun thing, Leaf, if we're forecasting ahead to the weekend, guess who's playing? Arizona is hosting Texas Tech this Saturday. So we're going to find out a little bit more about what both these teams are made of. I really hope JT Toppin is able to go for that game or I guess they don't really need him, it seems like. But, man, things are rolling for both Texas Tech and Arizona, and I feel like we got to take it as legitimate. It's crazy, crazy stuff. Good for both of them. 7 straight wins for Texas Tech. That's the longest active streak in the entire Big 12. Crazy stuff there. Leaf, I want a quick mention of an ACC game last night. Georgia Tech goes to Clemson to Littlejohn Coliseum, and the Yellow Jackets win in triple overtime, 89-86. So that means that Georgia Tech now, in the first 2 years of Damon Stoudemire, both years has gone to Clemson and won in multiple overtimes. Last year it was 2 OTs, this year 3. And like Georgia Tech is making a habit of doing this against the top of the ACC. Last year, not only did they win at Clemson, they beat Duke, they beat North Carolina. This year in back-to-back games now, they've beaten Louisville and Clemson, who for me is like competition. One of those two is your second best team in the conference behind Duke. Georgia Tech, it's crazy how they just keep hopping up and doing this here and there. They get a layup, the Yellow Jackets do at the end of regulation from Duncan Powell to send it to OT. And then they're up 3 right at the end of the third overtime. Really nice use of clock and timeouts from Clemson, but just a look from Hunter right at the buzzer. A good look from 3, as much as you can hope for right there, but it rims out and Georgia Tech wins. Leaf, does this do anything for you to diminish Clemson, or is it just Georgia Tech has been doing this in the Damon Stoudemire era and you just got to reshuffle the deck and get back to it?
I'm torn because Clemson, I think, needs to solidify, not that they need to solidify their resume to make the tournament, but they need to solidify, hey, I'm this good in the ACC to see themselves as a contender. Like last year's Clemson team was up and down, but they had dudes. This year they've got Chase Hunter, and I don't see the same potential with this team. And so I think that they're more vulnerable, and you're seeing that in terms of this game happening. You saw this in a couple other games where they've been played very closely by inferior teams in the ACC. So I am a little bit concerned by losing at home, but I will say, if you're going to look at talent level and you're just going to say, okay, here are the talent level, no roster construction, no depth, the top end talent level, of course, Duke's at the top, but Georgia Tech's not as low as you may think.
No.
So I think they're showing that ability to win when they play some of these teams, because they have guys that are not scared, and they're not like thinking, oh, they're going to impose their will on us. Like we have a say about this. And I think Damon Stoudemire is instilling a culture of belief in that regard. And then they have the guys who can do it.
Yeah. Georgia Tech jumped 11 spots in the net after this win today. For Clemson, I think we're going to find out a couple things in the next week, because not only did they have this home game against Georgia Tech, which you don't want to drop, but a big reason for that is because guess what's next? They host Duke on Saturday, and a quick turnaround to hosting North Carolina on Monday. And so we're going to learn a lot about these Tigers in the next 5 or 6 days. That's going to be really interesting. Leaf, some tough news came out yesterday for West Virginia. Tucker DeVries, coach or son of new head coach Darren DeVries, is going to miss the rest of the season, going to have surgery on his upper body injury he's been dealing with. They are going to apply for a medical redshirt. He played in 8 games this year. By the way, West Virginia is at TCU tonight. Thankfully, West Virginia has had Javon Small, and he's been the dude. But I think in order to maintain the high level, or the better level than expected from West Virginia, it's going to be very difficult to do this without Tucker DeVries. But I guess there is some finality to it, and now you move on without your stud.
Well, there is a good sign. I think you can get a medical red shirt and play one more year in West Virginia. So honestly, if I'm West Virginia, I'm kind of thrilled about this outcome, because he's missed enough games.
Yep.
It does stink that he can't play alongside Javon Small this season, because when they both played together, they were a tough team to beat. Surprisingly, like they didn't. And now you have they overachieved this year, and now we can support the cast. You can turn over a roster in the transfer portal, and he's back. So I think there is some positive outlook. At least that's the way I look at it. But it is difficult to see a guy as good as DeVries is and was to miss him, especially because this team, if healthy, could have made a run in March. Yeah, man. And Small will obviously be gone. This is his 4th year, and his class does not have COVID eligibility. So that'll be that. Leaf, let's obviously we could and perhaps should, if we had more time, unpack more from Tuesday night, but we do have a couple games Wednesday night that I want to highlight and point out. There's a big Wednesday slate, as there often is, but 4 in particular, 2 SEC games. The lone ranked on ranked matchup tonight, number 15 Mizzou at number 4 Tennessee. That's 7 p.m. It's going to be FanDuel has it Vols -8.5. Then we got Arkansas at Texas, 9 p.m. Horns by 7.5 at FanDuel. I'm curious about that game, Leaf, because Hogs are coming off that win at Kentucky. They've won 2 out of 3 after dropping their first 5 SEC games. But Texas similarly has been trending up. They have won 3 out of 4 after dropping 4 out of 5. So this is a game to
who is actually doing better right now. So there's those two SEC games. Leaf, we talked about that top of the Big Ten. Well, Michigan is looking to keep pace tonight. They host Oregon, 6:30 Eastern. FanDuel has it Wolverines by 7.5. And then we've got a critical Mountain West game, Colorado State at New Mexico, 10:30 p.m. Eastern on FS1. FanDuel has it Lobos minus 8.5. New Mexico, just one loss in Mountain West play. The Rams have two. Same is true of Utah State. So this is an important matchup at the top of the Mountain West. Leaf, out of that quartet of games, what stands out to you?
Well, I think the biggest game, of course, has to be the ranked unranked SEC game. I'm curious to see what Missouri is able to do, because Missouri has been this revelation. I mean, they went 0-18 last year in the SEC, and now they've beaten good teams. They beat Florida at Florida. And frankly, when Florida's healthy, I think they're better than Tennessee. And I understand that Tennessee had just beat them without Ziegler, but I'm curious to see if their shooting and just their ability to knock down shots, even if it is an unconventional offensive style, can infiltrate the vaunted Tennessee defense. So that'll be the game I'm watching. I also am curious to see if Oregon plays a little better, because right now they're really playing disappointing basketball. And Michigan, I don't think, has been all that great either, but I think Michigan will win that one. But, you never know.
Yep, they got to keep pace with Michigan State and with Purdue, with the 2 in that loss column in Big Ten play. All right, guys, fun show. Thanks so much for joining us. For those of you who are with us in real time on YouTube, grateful for you. For those of you who are watching or listening back later, so glad you were with us as well. Want to thank you so much for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or watch of the day. It's great to be together. Want to remind you that you can join the Locked On College Basketball Discord absolutely free. That link is in the show notes. We'd love to have you join us and talk college basketball all day long. Be a junkie, make it happen. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Andy Patton will host things, and it'll be a great time to be together unpacking Wednesday's slate of crazy action. Wait to see what that is. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild, Popes. Unfortunately, they lost last night. And shouts to our guy Mick Bruins, who did get a nice big dub last night. And we'll talk again tomorrow. But until then, peace.